Several similar large biobanks now operate, including one in the United Kingdom, which recently finished sequencing the genomes of 500,000 volunteers. These biobanks make it possible to do computerized searches to find relationships between people's genetic makeup and real-life differences, like how long they live, what diseases they get, and even how much beer they drink. The result is a statistical index of how strongly every possible difference in human DNA affects every trait that can be measured. In 2012, Decode's geneticists used the technique to study a tiny change in the APP gene and determined that the individuals who had it rarely developed Alzheimer's. They otherwise seemed healthy. In fact, they seemed particularly sharp in old age and appeared to live longer too. Lab tests confirmed that the change reduces the production of brain plaques, the abnormal clumps of protein that are a hallmark of the disease. One way evolution works is when a small change or error appears in one baby's DNA. If the change helps that person survive and reproduce, it will tend to become more common in the species, eventually, over many generations, even universal. This process is slow, but it's visible to science. In 2018, for example, researchers determined that the Bajau, a group indigenous to Indonesia, whose members collect food by diving, possess genetic changes associated with bigger spleens. This allows them to store more oxygenated red blood cells, an advantage in their lives. Even though the variation in the APP gene seems hugely beneficial, it's a change that benefits old people way past their reproductive years. So it's not the kind of advantage natural selection can readily act on, but we could act on it. That is what technology-assisted evolution would look like, seizing on a variation we think is useful and spreading it. The way, probably, that enhancement will be done will be to look at the population, look at people who have enhanced capabilities, whatever those might be. The Israeli medical geneticist Efrat Levi-Lahad said during a gene editing summit in 2023, "You are going to be using variations that already exist in the population that you already have information on. One advantage of zeroing in on advantageous DNA changes that already exist in the population is that their effects are pre-tested. The people located by Decode were in their 80s and 90s. There didn't seem to be anything different about them, except their unusually clear minds. Their lives, as seen from the computer screens of Decode's biobank, served as a kind of long-term natural experiment. Yet scientists could not be fully confident placing this variant into an embryo, since the benefits or downsides might differ depending on what other genetic factors are already present, especially other Alzheimer's risk genes. And it would be difficult to run a study to see what happens. In the case of APP, it would take 70 years for the final evidence to emerge. By that time, the scientists involved would all be dead. When I spoke with Stefansson in 2023, he made the case both for and against altering genomes with rare variants of large effect, like the change in APP. All of us would like to keep our marbles until we die, there is no question about it. And if you could, by pushing a button, install the kind of protection people with this mutation have, that would be desirable, he said. But even if the technology to make this edit before birth exists, he says, the risks of doing so seem almost impossible to gauge. You are not just affecting the person, but all their descendants forever. These are mutations that would allow for further selection and further evolution, so this is beginning to be about the essence of who we are as a species. Some genetic engineers believe that editing embryos, though in theory easy to do, will always be held back by these grave uncertainties. Instead, they say, DNA editing in living adults could become easy enough to be used not only to correct rare diseases, but to add enhanced capabilities to those who seek them. If that happens, editing for improvement could spread just as quickly as any consumer technology or medical fad. I don't think it's going to be germline, says George Church, a Harvard geneticist often sought out for his prognostications. The 8 billion of us who are alive kind of constitute the marketplace. For several years, Church has been circulating what he calls my famous or infamous table of enhancements. It's a tally of gene variants that lend people superpowers, including APP and another that leads to extra hard bones, which was found in a family that complained of not being able to stay afloat in swimming pools. The table is infamous because